Of the longest-running Buffyverse mysteries, so many of them have to do with the soul. Because Buffy's magic is usually in service of metaphor over strict logical coherence, it can get pretty wobbly when it comes to hard lore, because that's just not what Buffy lore is about. It's not about a tight system of rules and balances, it's about what it means for the story being told. It's why if you squint too closely at any mix of story developments, you can come up with more questions than answers. When we talk about vampires, we're talking about literal things for the characters to fight, but also a psychological and philosophical thought experiment. For example, we could try to unpack eternity for an eternity, and we wouldn't come up with an explanation that serves both literal and metaphorical purposes. This is because, by admission of the writers, they were focused on telling a certain story, in this case temporarily bringing Angelus back, over building a body of internally consistent lore. And there are shows out there in which that's more of a priority. But for better or for worse, in the Buffyverse, it just isn't. Which is fine, so long as we just make our peace with it. And central to this soul question is the idea of what it means to lose it or gain it. I did another video a little while back about why two cases of soul losing/regaining look so different, which boils down to souls give the ability to make meaningful change, and change happens over time and accumulates. But there's a second category of confusion I also see come up a lot, and I wanted to address it. It's the "a demon takes control of your body" narrative.
You die, and a demon sets up shop in your old house, and it walks, and it talks, and it remembers your life, but it's not you.
Is a vampire a person corrupted, or does an outside demon come in and become an amnesiac and take control? Vampires recovering souls is something of an anomaly, but lucky for us, we have 3 of those to consider. In each of these cases where vampires lose and then regain souls in some way, there's a clear carryover. Let's look at werewolves, for example. When Oz changes, does a wolf named Josh take over temporarily? Does Josh have friends and family and a favorite color? No. Oz becomes a werewolf temporarily. It's still Oz, just buried under animalistic impulses, and obviously his physiology changes. And in the same way, a person becomes a vampire. They're transformed physically, and the soul leaves their body. Beyond this, the show doesn't really spend a lot of time on the nitty-gritty magic of it all. Does the vampire blood change your DNA a la Spider-Man? Is it like a zombie infection? Because it's magic, and specifically Buffy magic, it's, again, less about the mechanics and more about the meaning. The narrative, and therefore most relevant purpose of vampirism, is that of a person stripped of their conscience, with that selfishness amplified, and then given fangs and bloodlust. The demon possession premise raises more questions than answers, answers that the show simply does not bother with. Who is this demon? Where did it come from? Why is it amnesiac? What's the point of this arrangement? This is the world's worst exchange program. Okay, so your soul leaves and goes to the ether. I possess your body and forget who I am.
Have we got a deal?
Both shows spend exactly 0 time making a real case for this. They do spend, on the other hand, a great deal of time showing people reflecting on their soulless lives and the things they did without a conscience. But to weigh all our evidence fairly, let's look at the handful of evidence for the demon rehousing program.
When you become a vampire, the demon takes your body, but it doesn't get your soul. That's gone. No conscience, no remorse. It's an easy way to live. But I've had a demon inside me for a couple 100 years. Just waiting for a good fight.
This one is a little goofy, kind of an endearing hallmark of early Buffy. We see some force inside Angel clearly fighting with Igon, but this is the one and only time we ever see something like this. This is also early in season 2, still very early in Buffyverse lore development, and because it never shows up again, this is one of those things that I would call an exception rather than something we decide the lore is now forever tethered to. We can use a little discernment here. But for argument's sake, I can also explain it away. A, the wording is because Angel is dramatic. B, the force that we see is what happens when an outside force enters an unstable host. What we see happening is the demon itself grappling with Angel's vampire essence. It's not equipped to possess something that isn't a human. That's it. Next.
He was a human form possessed, infected by the demon's soul.
Giles' logic is faulty because it's a second-hand or even third-hand account from a bunch of people who are known to manipulate evidence and who have every reason to favor black and white explanations of the world. If you're a secret society tasked with fighting vampires, it's pretty likely that you'll bump into them now and then. It's also more than likely that in these encounters with vampires, watchers have been bitten and turned. This is in fact something we see happen in Helpless. And when that happens, and watchers have to then confront their now undead colleague, they'd have every reason to be told something that makes it easier and less emotionally messy to dust them. It actually makes enormous sense as a piece of watcher training for them to be told, no, that's not your friend, that's the thing wearing its face.
That is not your friend. That thing may have your friend's memories, her appearances, but it's just a filthy demon, an unholy monster.
Of course this is what Watcher Protocol would be. It's just a matter of practicality. It would be so much easier to believe that the vampire who remembers you, who taunts you with intimate information, with the same eyes as your friend, isn't really them.
Well, just remember, a vampire's personality has nothing to do with the person it was.
Well, actually,
this is also a great way to help watchers avoid being swayed by vampire manipulations, again, telling themselves that anything that resembles their friend is an illusion. And this is also a bit of a kindness. This explanation would spare the memory and the dignity of the person they lost. They wouldn't have to believe that those cruel or scary parts of the vampire were always part of someone they knew, but just the work of a demon. The Watcher explanations of the lore are unreliable simply because they have no first-hand knowledge of what it feels like to become a vampire. And they'd have every incentive to frame it to get necessary work done, however unsavory. When Buffy talks to Forge, she's also only repeating what she's been told from Giles. At this point, she's not only speaking from secondhand experience, she's also early in her Slayer journey, and so far has never met Angelus. There's also the curious matter of this line.
When I sighted her, I set loose a demon, and it tore into me. But it was a demon talking, not her.
But this doesn't hold a ton of literal weight. Firstly, because in the very same scene, Spike also says,
When I sighted her, I set loose a demon.
See, he doesn't say, the demon that possessed me tried to turn her into a vampire. He says me. Secondly, Spike's motivation for what he's saying in this scene isn't pure truth-telling for the sake of it, but is also an attempt to jab at and hurt Robin. Spike proposes the same platitude that we covered when talking about the Watchers, which is that it's easier to conclude that the things that his mother was saying were complete demonic fabrications, rather than distortions of a partial truth. It's easier to reject nuance than to accept that, for example, a mother might love her son, and also occasionally feel suffocated by his idolization of her. And so it would make sense that these feelings would come out vicious and manipulative in a newly made vampire. Most significantly, Spike's own words, his entire story in Fool for Love, contradicts this. He tells us exactly how William informs Soulless William and then Spike.
I was through living by society's rules. Decided to make a few of my own.
In certain cases, when people say, it was the demon, I don't think we necessarily have to take it completely literally. When they say the demon, rather than referring to a literal case of possession, this can also just as easily be referring to the corrupted, soulless creature that embodies and exaggerates the worst parts of the person it used to be. So, these are the second-hand experiences. But when vampires themselves talk about first-hand experience losing a soul, and then sometimes gaining it again, it's unambiguous. It's always who I was and what I did. And most importantly, this is how the story treats it. I'm not going into the Angel-Angelus dichotomy, just watch this. But for a quick TLDR summary, this particular duality is a unique case among unique cases. Angelus with a soul spent 150 years as his own person, making choices that eventually evolve into Angel.
You've been to Missoula?
during the Depression. My depression. I was depressed there.
So much so that losing the soul again is effectively regressing over a century. Them coexisting is a paradox, but it's just the two ships of Theseus. The rebuilt ship, Angel, and the restored ship, Angelus. The show makes extremely clear that Angel's relationship with his father has everything to do with who Angelus becomes. His first murder is arguably his most human in this way. And William's relationship with his mother has everything to do with who Spike becomes. We see this over and over. These are things that are seriously explored as a way to invite the audience to reflect on their own characteristics and flaws and what to make of them. A conversation which, again, doesn't exist if we're talking about possession. The entirety of Fool for Love emphasizes the bridge between human William and Spike. And notably, in this episode, Spike speaks specifically to the transformation period from human to vampire itself, something that he was present for and aware of, and the narrative using it to draw parallels with the present.
Becoming a vampire is a profound and powerful experience.
I could feel this new strength coursing through me. Getting killed made me feel alive for the very first time.
Spike's actions in Season 7 are directly informed by Season 6. He speaks to the things that he couldn't understand without a soul, and that he now does.
You used me. You told me that, of course. Never understood it, though. Not till now.
In the Angel Season 5 episode Damage, both he and Angel reflect on what their vampire heydays were like.
And I'm supposed to what? Complain? Because hers wasn't one of the hundreds of families that did kill.
Again, not only is this conversation in constant first person,
For a demon, I never did think that much about the nature of evil.
I was only in it for the evil. That was everything to me.
but this is an incredibly meaningful discussion between two men about their respective corrupted dark sides and what it means to take responsibility now.
She's a monster.
She's an innocent victim.
So were we. Once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Darla is a fascinating case, and in my opinion, maybe the most interesting vampire on either show. Each time Darla loses and regains her soul, she's still very much herself. That's the whole point. Each iteration is informed heavily by the one that came before. Human Darla is amoral until her conscience kicks in, and then she seeks Angel. Then, once she's soulless again, she seeks Angel out again for some convoluted revenge, very much like Angelus did to Buffy for making him feel human. And then, once she has Connor's proxy soul inside her, Darla's emotions come back very much like the human Darla we remember. When Darla's vampired the second time, there's zero discussion of, was it the same demon that took her over? Because that's not even remotely a point worth discussing. It's Darla, transformed once again, and that's why the ensuing plot has any emotional weight. That's why there's continuity in her story, despite losing and regaining a soul multiple times. Darla is perhaps the most interesting example of this, simply for the amount of times this poor woman goes through it. The soul didn't restore some old human Darla from the 1600s, it's brought back Darla, who has every memory and experience of 400 years of a vampire, given her a mortal body and a conscience. And most of all, human Darla requests to be turned back into a vampire. She sees it as an escape for her illness and for her guilt. As someone who's now experienced vampirism and humanity back and forth, she knows exactly what it entails and wouldn't ask for it if it led to possession.
Life's too short. Believe me, I know. 400 years and still too short.
Pylea is its own fun anomaly. Here we see a literal demon, presumably the pure demon as it exists in a black and white world. The way we might take this is that it's literally just the pure DNA that Angel's vampire is encoded with, now fully taking him over. This transformation is probably most similar to werewolfism, because when he reverts, it's still Angel, right? Remembering exactly what he was. It's not so much soulless as animalistic. Think the difference between the partially transformed Oz and the full gorilla suit. If we operate with the premise of the demon takes over and sets up shop, the actual philosophical and psychological discussions of the show become moot. There's no need for Angel the series, because Angel isn't responsible for 150 years of carnage, some random demon is. Spike should regain his soul in season 7 and go,
"Wait a minute! Who are you?"
because he's just returned to his own body. But that's never how the show treats it when it matters. Both shows are in many ways extended metaphors and extended allegories. The only times it's referred to as some external source are from the mouths of people who've had no experience being vampires, using a frankly really understandable excuse to explain something that's otherwise pretty heartbreaking. If it's just some random vampire going, "Hey, these guys had mad mommy/daddy issues, let me replicate that," the entire show becomes profoundly less compelling. Most significantly, this premise isn't taken seriously by the text itself, insofar as it doesn't actually explore the implications, and in fact, the storylines and character arcs themselves directly contradict it.
I was a man once.
What does a man do that he mustn't?
You damned me.
I was Darla for so long.
For a demon, I never did think that much about the nature of evil.
I was only in it for the evil.
Some of the most powerful scenes in both shows rely on this understanding between the characters and between them and the audience. The handful of times that we actually see possession, the show makes that fact incredibly clear. Angel doesn't feel guilty over what Marcus did with his body because why would he? The reason Angel and Spike are interesting characters at all is because they are informed by their pasts. They are informed by their soulless behavior. That's the whole point. But there is something we can take from this. I think what we can take from the "a demon takes you over" narrative is an understanding of how people would rationalize and cope with the horrors and tragedy of vampirism in a world where it exists.
Jesse is dead. You have to remember that when you see him, you're not looking at your friend. You're looking at the thing that killed him.
As a blanket disclaimer, this is obviously my analysis of the text.
I'd call that a radical interpretation of the text.
Knowing the Buffy fandom well as I do, I'm sure other people have their own interpretations, which I'm sure we'll discuss passionately in the comments.
They talk about me in the chatty rooms?
The bottom line for me is, this is a magic system that writers have repeatedly admitted was maneuvered and tailored to fit the plot. That may not be satisfying to hear, but we can weigh narrative, thematic, and emotional consistency more heavily than mechanics of lore that is, by the creative team's own admission, built to suit that narrative, rather than the other way around. Because the Buffyverse is an extended metaphor, taking this richly poetic universe too literally can make us lose some of the meaning. And it's fair to be frustrated by this. It's fair to want a show that merges its internal rules and its meaning more effectively, that doesn't have interesting multi-season arcs complicated by a handful of contradictory lines from early world building. So what do we make of this? Because it's inconsistent, and we know this, there will always be some exception whatever way you look at it. So it's a matter of deciding what is a priority for the text, telling a story about demonic possession or about something else. To me, that answer is pretty clear throughout. The story being told by vampirism isn't a story about body snatching, identity theft. It's a story about guilt. It's a story about identity, choices, forgiveness, and how these things combine. That's where the story puts its focus, and therefore, so should we.